Yet everyone has faith in something.
No, they don't.
Including yourselves.
No, they don't.
I disagree, sir. Everybody has faith in
something. Well, you can disagree all day long, but I'm going to tell you what I mean by faith and why I don't have it. Faith is the excuse people give for believing in something when they don't have a good reason. If you have a good reason to believe in something, you don't need to make appeals to faith.
Well, saying to have a good reason, that is an opinion, I believe.
Well,
if you say, I have a good reason to believe in this, that's your opinion. I might think differently.
Yes, of course you could, but you could also be wrong.
Yes, and so could you.
Correct. So how do we go about determining which of us is actually right?
Well, that's my question. You say that the faith of a theist is gullibility.
Yes. Well, no, not the faith of a theist. I just say faith is gullibility. Doesn't mean it applies to theists. There are people who have faith in things like psychic healers and homeopathy and all sorts of other things, and that's also gullibility. And it is countered by education and an appeal to actually good, demonstrable standards of evidence.
But John said a couple of other things. One was that this idea of intelligence and reasoning and ability deserves an explanation. Those are his words. This is the appeal of religious claims and the appeal of claims about gods. Boy, it's really cool to have certainty. It's really cool to no longer have any questions and not be forced to say, I don't know. Sometimes when you say, I don't know, that's how you get to actually knowing. And those who assert that they know before it's justified are the ones that are halting this progress.
I'm not convinced any of us know. You're the one claiming to have an answer. Would you like to provide the evidence and the argument to support your actual answer? And if I find it compelling, then I'll agree with you. But my lack of an answer doesn't make your answer correct. This is the mindset of the creationists that go through and try to poke holes in evolution. And even if they poked holes so much that evolution ceased to be a concrete theory, they're not one step closer to proving creationism is true. And the main preacher came up to me at one point and said, doesn't it bother you? Doesn't it bother? Are you happy going to your grave not knowing the answers to these questions? No, I'm not. None of us are. We are all uncomfortable with this idea of not knowing, and that's why we have science. That's why we go out and try to find what the actual damned answer is. It's not that I'm comfortable not knowing, it's that I'm more uncomfortable pretending that I know. Moral system. You keep talking about how we don't have limits. I have plenty of limits. And we live in a society that has plenty of limits. As Daryl's already pointed out, most societies have limits. You keep going to this slippery slope thing of, well, if there is no, 10 Commandments or Jesus or whatever, then you've got no limits. You'll just run around raping and killing people. Well, that's already demonstrably false. And there have been multiple studies that actually investigate the correlation between the religiosity of a society and its societal health. And there is always a strong negative correlation. The more atheistic the society, the better they score on societal health factors, from everything from teenage pregnancy rates to STDs to happiness to wealth to murder, rape to healthcare. Now, go out and do some actual research that contradicts this, and then you might have a case for your assertion that I think you'll live a better life if you're. No, you won't. There's no evidence to demonstrate this. This is wishful thinking. Not only have you gone and said, well, I'll pick and choose what I want, you've done it in a way where you're just trying to support your own wishful thinking. And until you actually come up with evidence, and until you demonstrate that you care about the truth, we don't really need to waste any more time on it.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, the way you phrased it is kind of one of those things that we hear quite often where atheists have nothing to believe in. That's not true. Atheists believe in all sorts of things. I believe in probably most of the things that you believe in, with the exception of a God. What you're talking about is on the subject of belief in gods, do atheists have some burden of proof?
Right.
Yeah, the answer is no. And that's because atheism and theism aren't positions God exists, or theism isn't God exists and atheism isn't no God exists. They are both positions on the proposition that a God exists, and theists accept that proposition as true, and atheists reject that proposition as true. It is a complete failure of an understanding of the burden of proof to expect atheists to demonstrate that a God doesn't exist. It's the same reason why in a courtroom the onus is on the prosecution, And so you can really view this as the prosecution has claimed that a God exists, and I'm finding that God not guilty of existing. I don't know for sure if that God is completely innocent of existing. I can't know that. That would be the null hypothesis, the thing that could never actually be demonstrated. And so my vote is not guilty.
On the question of whether or not why I find the question of God extraordinary, have I found it rare? Yeah, I've found it incredibly rare. I have yet to find a single example that I find reliable that demonstrates that a God actually exists, despite continued appeals to people to provide the evidence, and I was a fundamentalist Christian for 25 years, and many appeals on my own to God and then to other gods to present themselves or do something of that kind. I know that's not what we're talking about, but yes, I do find it an extraordinary claim. It ties in with something that John had said about his claim that the natural world plus the supernatural world is always going to be a better answer. Well, sure, it's magic. Magic solves everything. But until you demonstrate that anything supernatural has ever occurred, you cannot assert that it's a better explanation. In fact, it may detract from you finding an actual explanation, something that John seems to think that atheism is guilty of. His example of junk DNA, saying that, oh, we found this junk DNA. Well, guess what, John? It didn't halt science. Science kept going, and science found the flaws in those assumptions. So you're fear-mongering about the end of science as a result of scientists finding junk DNA is one that I just don't understand.
And I raise the issue of slavery because anybody who watches the show knows that it's my go-to argument. It's the one that's most obviously immoral and most clearly endorsed. Just yesterday, was it yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. Wow, need sleeps. Just yesterday, I was at University of Texas lecturing to a class, and after it was over, I've done 2 debates with a guy by the name of Cliff Connectley at Texas State. And he happened to be at UT Austin preaching, although for some reason he doesn't want to debate me again. Maybe it's because I'm that condescending asshole guy, I don't know. But he was out there and somebody asked him about slavery, and he lied once again. And I'm not very free with accusing people of lying, but I think that's the only explanation for it after we've had this discussion. Because when we talk about does the Bible endorse slavery, he goes to a passage from Paul where he's talking to his Philemon, who would runaway slave, saying, I want you to go back. And when you go back, tell your master, I don't want you to be a slave anymore. That type of thing. And he thinks that this is the Bible saying that slavery is wrong. And he says this while ignoring everything in Exodus 21 that expressly tells you who to enslave, how to enslave them, that they're worth 6 shekels, that you have to let Jewish males go after 7 years. The women you get to keep. Have to go after 7 years unless you give them a wife and kids, and then you can trick them into being your slave forever. That it expressly says that these are your property that you can pass down, that you are to buy your slaves from the heathen around you. And somehow or another, none of that matters to Cliff, because Paul wanted his slave friend to not be a slave anymore. This is the way theists will think. There's a tap dance to make the Bible say whatever they need it to say. And when we had this debate at the Church of Christ and I brought up slavery, we went through this again. And I heard several different explanations from several different preachers. One of them said, well, this was the norm at the time, and God was implementing laws about slavery to soften slavery so that we would eventually realize that slavery was wrong and get rid of it. He's God! If he can tell you don't kill people and don't eat shrimp, certainly he can say don't own people as property. How hard was that? It drives me crazy. It's one of the reasons why I hate the word spiritual and spirituality, because they're completely freaking useless labels. But the label that God that gets bandied about, people are like, oh, no, God is nature, God is love, God is energy, or God is all of us, or some consciousness. Yet, no. The word carries some baggage with it because of its historical use. It would be wrong for me to say, this coffee cup is God. It doesn't have any of the identifiable characteristics of any of the classical definitions of God where we get the baggage from. And the biggest one is, this exists. I mean, there's one big difference for you right there. But it's dishonest, disingenuous of people to try to argue God as something else. Hey, if God is energy and that's all, just use the word energy.
Okay.
You don't get to add the word God and then ignore the baggage when it's convenient and yet use the baggage when it's convenient. You know, oh, God's energy, but he really, really needs $20.
If the chief complaint is not tied directly to what has been said, then that's just posturing. So I'll have people comment on various videos or whatever and say, oh, Matt might be good on the God issue, but he's terrible on this, or this, you know. And they'll use language that's obnoxious and annoying. But I ask them all the same question. What is my position that you disagree with, and why do you think it's wrong? Nobody's ever even gotten the first one right. Instead, they will saddle me with somebody else's position or something they heard or something that they have interpreted based on their own confusion about what's said. And if we can't get past, we've lost sight of nuance. And it's, if you sometimes say anything that is even vaguely in opposition to somebody's position, you become immediately the worst thing ever. And if we are going to shelter medieval, harmful, misogynistic thought as if, well, we can't criticize that because that would be racist. I don't know how you can possibly criticize anything at that point.
Ridiculous ideas are by definition deserving of ridicule. Some people will take it personally. There's not always something you can do about that and still make the point, because some of those people are offended that you and I even exist, or that we won't sit quietly in the corner with our damn mouth shut. How dare you? I'm way over time, aren't I? Anyway, I was just like a lot of those people. I was a Rush Limbaugh, ditto head, fundamentalist, Southern Baptist, occasionally going to Pentecostal churches because that's where the good music was, Bible thumping, horribly backslidden, couldn't care less about Christianity, just like everybody else. There's a vicious circle going on there. And my thoughts were my own. And I was able to find my way out despite religious indoctrination, despite all of the fallacies, despite all of the pollution, and so can other people. And what they need is more voices. They need to get to know more atheists. They need to realize that half of the people that they know who they think are just, you know, maybe spiritual or whatever, they're atheists. The guy that's picking up your garbage and the guy that's operating on your heart, they're probably atheists. Actually, the more scientific careers, the higher educated the job is, the more likely that they're going to be atheists. And that's something we need to fix too, which is why I'm after the rednecks.